The moment Daniel stood up from his chair, already reaching for his coat, the door of the cafe swung open and every conversation inside seemed to pause. Mud dripped onto the polished floor, thick and dark, leaving uneven footprints that led straight toward his table. His blind date looked like she had crawled out of a ditch rather than driven across the city, her hair tangled, her dress stained, her breath uneven as if she had run the last mile. Daniel's jaw tightened, embarrassment and irritation mixing in his chest, and just as he decided this was some kind of cruel joke fate had played on him, he noticed her eyes. They weren't apologetic or desperate. They were steady, honest, and filled with something that made his fingers loosen on his coat, because for the first time that evening, he felt a pull he couldn't explain, the strange sense that if he walked away now, he would lose something he didn't yet understand but would regret forever. He had agreed to the blind date out of boredom more than hope. As a self-made millionaire, Daniel had grown used to people seeing his success before they saw him. Friends said this woman didn't know who he was, that she worked with their mutual acquaintance at a community center. That alone had convinced him to come. But Mud was not part of the plan. She stopped at the edge of the table, clearly aware of how she looked, and instead of rambling excuses, she simply said she was glad he waited. Her voice was calm, almost warm, and that irritated him even more than the mud. He gestured for her to sit, still unsure why he hadn't already left. As she settled into the chair, she explained that on her way to meet him, she had seen a bus skid on the wet road and crash into a roadside barrier. People stood around filming, but no one helped. She had climbed down into the muddy slope to pull out a frightened child trapped near the wreck. By the time emergency services arrived, she was covered in dirt, and the cafe was already calling to say she was late. Daniel listened, skeptical at first, until he noticed her hands. They were scraped and trembling slightly, not the hands of someone inventing a dramatic story for attention. As the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. The irritation faded. She laughed softly at herself, joked about ruining first impressions, and asked him questions that had nothing to do with his company, his investments, or his lifestyle. She wanted to know what made him feel alive, what he feared, what he wished he had done differently. Daniel found himself answering honestly, something he rarely did. He spoke about the loneliness that came with success, about dinners filled with flattery and empty smiles. She listened without interrupting, her muddy dress forgotten by everyone around them. When the bill came, she reached for her bag, embarrassed again, but he stopped her. Outside, before they parted, she thanked him for not walking away. Daniel almost told her he had been close, but instead he said he was glad he stayed. As he watched her disappear down the street, still muddy, still unapologetically herself, he felt a quiet curiosity settle in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but that curiosity would soon turn into something much deeper, something that would challenge everything he believed about love and worth. The second time Daniel saw her, she was clean, smiling, and standing in front of his office building, and the first thought that struck him was how ordinary she looked without the mud. For a brief, confusing moment, he missed it. He invited her inside for coffee, and that was when reality began to test whatever spark had formed between them. His world and hers were not the same. His days were filled with meetings and numbers, hers with community work, broken families, and small victories that never made headlines. Friends warned him she was after security, while people in her life whispered that he would never truly understand her. The tension grew when he offered to donate a large sum to her community center, thinking he was helping. She refused, her voice firm but not angry, saying she didn't want charity tied to expectations or control. It was the first real conflict between them, and it left Daniel unsettled. No one had ever refused his money before. They stopped talking for weeks. During that silence, Daniel tried to drown himself in work, but the image of her muddy footprints on the cafe floor kept returning to him. He realized that what had unsettled him most was not her refusal, but the mirror she had unknowingly held up to him. He had always believed money could fix problems, could replace presence, effort, and time. One evening, he drove past the community center and saw her there, laughing with children, her sleeves rolled up, her hands dirty again, though this time with paint. Without thinking, he walked in. He didn't bring a check. He brought himself. He asked how he could help, and when she handed him a brush, something shifted between them. From that day on, they built something slowly and imperfectly. They argued, learned, and compromised. Daniel learned to listen before offering solutions. She learned that accepting help didn't always mean losing independence. When the community center faced closure due to lack of funding, Daniel didn't swoop in as a savior. Instead, he worked quietly behind the scenes, connecting people, opening doors, empowering her to lead the effort. On the day the center reopened, she stood beside him, her eyes shining, and thanked him not for his money, but for his respect. It was then he understood what he had almost walked away from that first night. Years later, when people asked how they met, Daniel never mentioned the blind date arrangement or the cafe's name. He told them about the mud, about the moment he judged too quickly, and about the choice he made to stay. He would say that sometimes life tests you in the most uncomfortable ways, placing mud on the people who matter most just to see if you're willing to look past it. And if you do, if you choose curiosity over judgment and kindness over pride, you might just find a love that changes not only your heart, but the way you see the world forever. Weeks had passed since that first chaotic encounter, and yet Daniel couldn't shake the image of her, muddy, determined, and completely unbothered by appearances. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, realizing that night had awakened something he hadn't felt in years, genuine curiosity about someone else's life, someone who existed outside his polished, calculated world. On a rainy Thursday, he found himself standing outside the community center where she worked, the smell of wet earth in the air reminding him of that fateful evening. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he had imagined their connection or if it had been real. But when she looked up from helping a group of children with painting projects, their eyes met, and all doubt vanished. This time, she was clean, dressed in casual clothes, her hair tied back loosely. She smiled at him, not the nervous, self-conscious smile from the cafe, but a smile that radiated strength, warmth, and ease. Daniel stepped forward, feeling a nervous thrill he hadn't experienced in years. He offered to help with the day's activities, and she hesitated for a moment before handing him a paintbrush. Working alongside her, he felt out of place at first, the children laughing and splashing paint, the sound of chatter and joy alien to the quiet, controlled world he was used to. Yet, as the hours passed, he began to understand her world, the satisfaction she found in small victories, in helping others without expectation or reward. They talked between tasks, sharing pieces of their lives that didn't touch on wealth or status. Daniel confessed the loneliness he often felt despite all his success, how he realized that money could buy comfort but not connection. She spoke about her childhood, the struggles she faced, and the joy she found in giving to others. For the first time, Daniel realized that attraction wasn't just about appearances, it was about empathy, authenticity, and resilience. The mud, he thought, was just the first test. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. They met outside of work, not in fancy restaurants, but in parks, at community events, and at small cafes tucked away from the city's chaos. Every time he saw her, Daniel was reminded that life's richest moments were rarely planned. He had to step out of his comfort zone, embrace imperfection, and trust in the raw, unpolished reality of people and experiences.